Well, here we are. It is June 9th, 2022, and today, as promised, a couple of weeks ago, I mentioned we were working on the video for the post-auction results at Christie's in Hong Kong around the end of May, just a couple of weeks ago, not quite, about 10 days ago, and wanted to go through and see how it did. And the sales didn't do great, to be perfectly honest. And it's not the fault of Christie's or anything. I think there's a bit of an issue going on with the economy. The Dow dropped 10-15%, for example, in the weeks leading up to the sale, which shakes a little bit of confidence, might make a few people reluctant to shell out cash for non-liquid assets. And antiques are assets, but they're not liquid. So if you want to get your money out quickly, or you have a need for the cash, or you want to do something, you have to wait. There's a lag time, quite frankly, unless you're so desperate you sell the stuff for nothing. And I think it caused some hesitancy. And I also think that a lot of collectors, and it's a thing that happens to collectors, is that they begin to build up ideas of values in their collections, and when they go to sell them, the auction house wants to sell the material, but they have this problem with the seller who's demanding very high estimates, very strong estimates on everything. And any auctioneer will tell you that's been around for a while, and I was an auctioneer for a long time, 20 years. It hurts you. Estimates are not your friend if you're selling a collection. People know what things are worth. All an estimate does is it tells potential buyers roughly what typically what the minimum selling price is going to be, because the reserve has to be below the low estimate. So what they do is they put in high estimates and then stick the reserve under it. And if that's the case, it discourages people. People go to auctions hoping to get a particularly good buy. They're hoping to maybe there's a shot at a bargain. They're collectors, but they're also money people. And you can't separate the two very well, I'm afraid. So what happens is you get big objects, big estimates, and after a while, people get discouraged. People don't want to chase high estimates, and the truth is that the market will tell you what your stuff is worth. You can't tell the market. Collectors can't tell the market what their things are worth by sticking or getting the auction house to put a high estimate on things. It's up to the market, and the market will tell you on that given day, with exposure, what those things are worth if they're adequately promoted in Christie's and Sotheby's and Bonhams and some of the other larger auction houses around the world do a great job promoting their sales. So if they've done that, and you're serious about selling it, think twice about setting up high estimates, because what happens is ultimately is if you own a piece that's, let's say some of these people had maybe an item that was worth $100,000 or $200,000 or $1 million, didn't sell. Now what are you going to do? How many years are you going to wait to sell it again? Because one of the things that turns buyers off is to see these pieces, and we've all seen them, that turn up in the market every 2 or 3 years. Sometimes they sell, sometimes they don't sell, and they just keep getting churned. People lose interest in them. What people do want to collect are things that haven't been on the market in a long time, that are rare and particularly beautiful. And the longer they've been off the market, the better things do. And that's a simple reality in most cases. 80% of the time, 90% of the time, the items that were bought, maybe in the 60s, the 70s, maybe the 80s, or earlier, when they come back to the market, then there's an audience for them, as long as the owner hasn't been trying to sell them privately around the market for a year or two, which does happen. This is one of the problems that people self-sabotage their own items sometimes when they want to sell them. They sort of flog them around a little bit between dealers and whatnot, and if they don't sell them, they send them to the auction house. Well, the time they get to the auction house, everybody's already seen it and made up their minds whether they want to own it or not. And there's a lot of psychology that goes into it. Anyway, we're going to take a look, all right, and see how these sales did. And this is the first one. It was a small sale. That was the Wang Jinglu collection, Imperial Qing Dynasty porcelain, 28 lots. And these were some really good examples. It's this beautiful cobalt blue Kangxi period, Marken period jar, in wonderful color. Okay, didn't sell with a 2 to 3 million Hong Kong estimate. And that's sort of a pattern you see in this sale. It looks like about every third lot didn't sell. Here you had a Yongshen twin handle vase, estimated at 18 to 28 million Hong Kong, which is roughly two and a quarter to $3.25 million. Didn't sell. All right, and the reason is the estimate was too high. Simple as that. The estimate was too high by about probably 20%, 30%, too high. All right, but it's somebody, probably the seller, somebody saw one that brought great money, and that's what they wanted for it. Well, they're in a different economy now, and I suspect that Christie's advised them to relax the reserves a little bit and relax the estimates. But if you want the collection, you got to sort of deal with the collector. So let's have a look. This is one of the pieces that was in the sale. It did sell. It did pretty well. What did it bring it? This thing brought 4.9 million Hong Kong or dollars or roughly 600,000 US. Qinlong mark and period vase based on an early bronze form. Beautifully decorated, nice cobalt ground. It's a well-known type. They reproduce these, by the way. There are a lot of copies of these. There's only a few of them in the, there's a couple of handfuls of these in the world. But if you looked on, some of the auction houses sites, you'd think they were falling out of the trees. But here they are. This was a really good one, and it sold for a significant amount of money, right at the top of its estimate, including the buyer's premium. So there you are. So that was one that did quite well for its estimate. And then you have this one, the here we go. Let's get back over to this. This is the auspicious Chun Chu Ping in cobalt blue, a very popular form. And this one was enormous. This was a great big one. It was 26 inches high, which is quite large for these. Most of the time, this form, you see them, they're 15 to 20 inches high. This one is quite a bit bigger and beautifully glazed, absolutely beautifully glazed. Yongshen mark and period. And there's a rather good write-up on it, by the way, down here at the bottom, and it talks about the form and the shape and the history of it, and this beautiful sacrificial blue. It's sometimes referred to color, and there was good interest in it, and it did go over its estimate. This is one of the pieces that went over its estimate. Sold for 8 million Hong Kong, 8.5 million Hong Kong. The high estimate was 5 million. All right, so there's a piece that got over. I'm not showing you all the ones that didn't. We're going to go through the ones that actually found buyers. But very rare type, very, very rare type, and had good previous, it was sold by Marchant and Son in London back in the 90s, and they good reputation, good provenance, and it had been on loan to the Minneapolis Museum of Art, Institute of the Arts, rather, for the last 17 years, or from 2003 to 2020, and that doesn't hurt it, okay? Because that means it's been published, and it's Yongshen, it's mark and period, and there you go. And they've got some really good photographs in here, by the way, of these pieces. They also have the video, which I think is a terrific idea. It gives everybody a good chance to look at things before they sell. And if you can't get there, this is one of my favorite things in the sale. I really like these. These are these vases, jars rather, done in the manner of cloisonné. Here it is. It's a Qinlong mark and period jar, beautifully glazed, beautifully decorated. These are quite rare. These are very, very rare, actually, with this sort of matte finish, thick cobalt ground, and then worked with gilt ridges around it, forming cloisons, just like cloisonné vases, and then enameled into it. And these are pretty rare. And this is a particularly big one, and looked to be a superb example. Obviously made for the imperial family. There is a write-up explaining where they believe these were exhibited in the imperial palace, and it did fabulously well. What's really interesting is the bottom of it's very interesting, because there's the gold mark on the bottom. No, we don't want the video. We want to look at that. There it is. All right, and you have this very nicely shaped foot. The foot rim on this is beautifully carved. revealing that white porcelain that's so typical of these early early imperial wares. Beautifully done, beautiful white porcelain biscuit showing through, and then you have this very evenly glazed bottom with a Qianlong mark highlighted in gilt on the bottom. That's about as good as it gets. And this did pretty well. This sold for 14 million Hong Kong against a 12 to 20 million dollar Hong Kong estimate, which means it went for roughly about 1,800,000-700,000, something like that. But it was just, I suspect it sold just at the reserve. This is the selling price shown here is the hammer price plus the buyer's premium. And the buyer's premium is 25% or so. So I suspect this thing sold just at the reserve, which is a significant amount of money. But the owner obviously had higher hopes. And then on to this really fine Qianlong period Famille Rose vase. There it is. And Yankai enamels. And the thing that was interesting about this vase was they know when it was made. And the poems on the vase were written by the Emperor Qianlong. He had written before he became the emperor, he used to write poetry. And he had these books of poems, and they sent them to the imperial kiln and had them transcribed onto porcelain. It was something he wanted, a special gift, and this beautiful decorative technique. And at the time that this was made, there was a particular artist in China, a painter living, whose style that did these type of floral arrangements in trees and so forth was very popular. And I can't remember his name. His name was there it is, Jian Tingxi, and he was a well-known official, scholar, artist, very popular in the court. He was considered to be a man of great taste, and they used the enamelers when they did the floral decorations on this, copied his style of painting, and then coupled it with Qianlong's poems. So this is has a good, interesting history, and they think this vase was probably made. I think they thought around dated to around 1771. Let me see here. Oh no, 1752. There it is. All right. Another one was made later on. Anyway, so this would have been then under the tutelage of Tang Ying, the famous kiln master who during his tenure, he was the head of the kilns at the imperial kiln, and during his tenure, between the Young Chen period and into the Qianlong period, before he stepped down around 1760, did a lot of really innovative things, and the workmanship, the style. He was always looking for things that would impress the emperor, and they went all out on this. This is quite a thing, and it ended up selling for 10 million Hong Kong against a 8 to 12 million dollar, 12 million Hong Kong estimate. So that would work out roughly to about 1.3 million dollars US. For those of you that are keeping score at home. Alrighty, and that was sort of how the sale went. It wasn't a terribly big sale. There were a number of things in there that were quite good. There were a couple of nice monochromes. One of them sold, one of them didn't. The blue and white pieces were sort of a mixed bag all the way around. The flambe glazed here, Qianlong seal mark in it, didn't get off the ground. And neither did the Porcelain glazed hoof-form vases with Qianlong marks. And so forth. So there you are. So it was sort of a little bit of a mixed bag. All right, and then we come over here to this sale. This was the important Chinese works of art sale, and it was a little bigger sale, about 130 or 40 lots, and they had also about a 35% or so buy-in rate, from what I can see. And the pieces were all perfectly good. There was nothing wrong with them. But I'm going to talk about one thing. This vase over here that sold. This is it. is virtually identical to the one that sold at Sotheby's just a month or so ago, for example. All right, this sold. This was from the Lau collection. This was earlier in the month, and this vase sold for 12.5 million Hong Kong dollars against an 8 to 12 million Hong Kong estimate. All right, and this was just like 5 weeks ago, and it sold for that, which is about 8.5. What does that work out to? That works out to about $1.5 million, right? And then we come to this one, nearly identical to that, same period, same mark, same everything, had a 4 to 6 million Hong Kong estimate and sold for $8 million. All right, so the estimate was low. The estimates for this vase were set before the Sotheby's sale, and they went a little more conservatively on it, and it went over the high estimate. Obviously, the high estimate was 6 million, and it went for 8.5 million Hong Kong, or about $1 million. So it brought about a third less for some reason, and I think the economy had a lot to do with it, to be perfectly honest. All right. And then getting back over to we're going to get back into that sale a bit and go through some of these lots. The furniture did pretty well across the board. There's still a lot of interest in furniture. There's still a lot of interest in silks and that kind of thing. The decorative arts are doing quite well. The furnishings are doing quite well. But some of the ceramics, I just think that people have gotten too big. The numbers have gotten too big in everybody's heads. And this is a reality check, I think, for some of them. One of the things that did do well, but didn't surprise too many people with the price result, was this really good transitional period figural sleeve vase with inscription. And the values. This brought $1 million Hong Kong against a 250 to 350 thousand Hong Kong estimate. And the transitional vases is one of the areas where we've seen over the especially in the last 4 or 5 years, it seems that they are doing increasingly well. And I've said it many times, it's due to the work and interest developed by the Butler family and the books that that had come out on the topic of transitional wares. And this was a really fine example. And isn't that long ago? This vase was not that many years ago, maybe 30 years ago. This vase would have brought maybe $4,000 or $5,000 in an auction, maybe. And this time around, it did a heck of a lot better. And this is a really fine work, but they get very careful out there because they are making lots of copies of these vases right now. And I get inquiries on the inquiry program, the identification assistant. I get probably 3 to 5 fake transitional pieces pictures sent every week. They are turning up everywhere. They turn up on eBay. They turn up in live auctioneers. It's getting a little crazy, and some of them are actually selling for pretty good money. Because they're fairly simple form, they're not that difficult to copy, and you got to be extremely careful when looking at them. Pay close attention, study the bases, study how the cobalt is applied. This one is spectacularly well applied. This one is really well done. The colors are so even, everything is shaded beautifully. The gentle shading in this man's robe is just fabulous, and the same in the leaves and so forth. And it did fine. It brought about $120,000, $115,000, something like that, which is a big price for transitional porcelain. And then on to this, and this is something that's kind of surprised me. This was a really fabulous Imperial Zetan hardwood throne carved with gilt lacquer on it. And given the prices of furniture, when you have just Ming cabinets and that sort of thing selling for $2, $3, $4 million sometimes, and here you have this estimated at 5 to 7 million Hong Kong, and it ended up selling for just barely the reserve. It looks like 5.9 million Hong Kong with the buyer's premium included. So it means the hammer price was under 5 million, obviously. And that's probably what the reserve was. And I'm really at a loss to understand why these things aren't of more interest in the market with collectors. I don't understand it. This is a spectacular piece of furniture. Absolutely superb. Let me see, did they date this? I don't think they dated it, did they? They just said Qing Dynasty, 18th to 19th century. I don't know why. To me, it looks like a an 18th century example with all the gilding and so forth. But they're hedging a little bit on it. But the quality of the work, and it's Zeton, and when you look at all the little details. And then you have these this giant carved panel with dragons, and then it's mirrored on this side and on that side. And then on the outside, there's that, and these are the outside panels done in gilt lacquer, basically copying the carving from the inside. There's this, and then this would be on the backboard, exposed to the outside. So the carved wooden section was facing the inside of the chair. And it sold for 5 million Hong Kong, which isn't an insignificant amount of money, but it's around so that works out to $600,000-700,000 US. And I think that is an absolute steal. I think these are just ridiculously undervalued. All right, and then there was the Dao Sai vase, extremely rare. Maybe this is the one that was done in 1770s. 1771. Okay, it was this one, and this was done in Dao Sai enamels. And as they used to refer to these, it's interesting. In the 18th century, they referred to these as Chenhua kiln enamels. And the reason they called them Chenhua kiln was that the Dao Sai enamels were developed during the Chenhua period. They were really perfected. And it was a term that they carried forward into the Qianlong period when describing the color. So they call it Chenhua kiln colors. And this is it. The potting on it was superb. The animal going up the baby dragon, baby chimera climbing up the neck, and so on. But you notice that the workmanship, the coloring on this was absolutely stupendous. Absolutely stupendous. The shading, the color tones, and we talk about that a lot in the replies when I get inquiries from people about what things are through the identification assistant. I often show them examples or talk about the shading and the colors of and so forth, because the modern copies, for example, they're pretty good at copying patterns, but where they fall down is in the shading and the tone of the enamels. The colors are wrong because they didn't have all the colors they have today because of chemistry. So there were certain colors that they could do, and there were certain colors and tones that they didn't do because of chemistry, basically. And the colors of this piece are absolutely outstanding, top to bottom, and they're worth studying. All right, but at any rate, this one was a heck of a fine vase. And it was pretty good size. It was 20 inches tall. This wasn't a 10 or 12 inch vase. And it was estimated at 30 to 50 million Hong Kong. It was one of the most highly estimated pieces, I think, in the sales, outside maybe some of the paintings. And it sold for 34 million Hong Kong, which means the hammer price was down around in the low 20 million range. So the estimate wasn't right flat up against the low estimate, obviously. But it wasn't a heavy result, but it was a respectable result. But rare. And when was the last time this was on the market? Long time. Look at this. Munson Williams Proctor Arts Institute, Utica, New York. It was on loan there, and it was bought by the Williams family. Oh, this was the piece that was sold to benefit the institution. The vase is being sold by the Munson Williams Proctor Arts Institute in Utica to benefit the Helen Munson Williams Acquisition Fund, and so forth. I always wonder why they do that. They're not going to replace this vase with something as good. And so obviously the museums a lot of museums are having a rough time these days, and they need the cash, I guess. But it's a shame to let a thing like that go. This has been in that museum since forever, since the museum was started. It was bought. It was interesting. This was bought at the at the gallery there in New York, the American Art Galleries, which is one of the most legendary auction and sales outfits in the United States early on in the 19th century that was started, and this was sold in 1884 or 1883. And they even have a letter. They had a letter from the gallery to the owner, to the family who bought it, to the Walters family, explaining the history of the vase as much as they knew at the time, which made it very interesting. But this hasn't been on the market for 140 years, and it just made the low estimate. All right. And then over to this, there was this really interesting. This is a very rare thing, and it's a pattern that you see later on, more refined during the Kangxi period. But this was a very rare either late Ming or Chongsen period dragon dish, and it's not terribly refined. It's just terribly rare. But the enamels had quite a bit of wear to them. There were some nicks around the edges and so forth. It looked like the part of the rim might have been ground back a little over there and so forth. But this pattern, if you collect Kangxi wares, or you're familiar with Kangxi porcelains, a similar version of this with the facing dragon here was done during the Kangxi period. Often he's shown clutching the pearl. In this case, the pearl is over here, the pearl of perfection. And in the Kangxi examples, the pearl is on a number of these plates is placed right here with the dragon clutching it with both claws. So this is an early version of that. And at any rate, this was estimated at 300,000 to 500,000 Hong Kong and sold for 1.8 million Hong Kong. So there was a lot of interest in this. It may be well, it's rare, and I suspect it has to do with the fact that it became used more and more often in the Kangxi period. It came from a Japanese private collection, the Kyushu in Kyushu, formed in 1950s. In a collection in Japan. A lot of great stuff ended up in Japan. The Japanese were fantastic collectors, still are. All right. So that was a successful thing. And then there was this really wonderful Yuzhou Northern Sung celadon, beautifully carved. And as they point out in the discussion on this piece, there's some good lot essays here by Rose Kerr. I think it's Rose Kerr wrote these, or is it Rosemary Scott? I always get them mixed up. They don't say. Anyway, it's not important, but it had its lid, which makes these very rare. Most of these that turn up in the market look like just bowls and they don't have their lids. But when they have their lids, there's a lot of interest in them. And this one was superbly well carved. Beautiful, beautiful carving. So when they carve into these, it creates high and low points. So when they pour the glaze in the deeper channels where the deeper carving is done, the glaze pulls up and creates these very nice shadows highlighting the carving. And that's how that works, in case you're wondering. All right, so they would carve into the porcelain while it's green before it's fired and create the pattern and then run the glaze over it. And hopefully, if they do it right and don't let the glaze run down over the foot, which obviously they didn't do, you end up with these beautiful patterns showing up with these deeply carved porcelains. And this one is Northern Sung, and of course the celadons were a favorite, and a lot of these ended up in Japanese collections. This one was estimated at 600,000 to 800,000 Hong Kong, ended up selling for 2.1 million Hong Kong, went way over the estimate to around, what does that work out to? That works out to about $2.7 million, roughly, right? I think, somewhere around there. No. Excuse me. What am I saying? No, divide that by 8. So 300,000 or 400,000, I guess, it was the price, but it had a much lower estimate. Sorry, I get the conversions throw me off sometimes. And it was sold by Eskenazi. He published it, illustrated it, and again, rare thing, hasn't been in the auction market for a long time, and did fine. All right, I think Eskenazi probably got it privately. And this was an example of this Yuan Dynasty vase that was in here. For some reason, it was withdrawn, and I haven't heard why. But given the not a lot of information on it, they just withdrawn. and I don't know why. Maybe they had somebody offered them a strong price, and they just took it, but it didn't get into the sale. All right, and then there's this. This is sort of an interesting jar. This is it's funny that in the description they call it Yuan Dynasty, and then at the bottom of the description, when they're finishing up their comments, I remember they said. They say that it's possibly late Ming, because there wasn't a huge difference between Yuan and late Ming ceramics. In some cases, it was just a continuation. But this thing has a very good long write-up on it, and explains that this jar had belonged to a Japanese family, the Matsudaira family. They were a powerful family going back centuries in Japan, and they owned this jar for a long time, for like 300 years, and it was used to dry tea leaves, part of the tea ceremony. And they would put the tea in here in the fall when it's harvested, and it would be sealed up. And then there's the whole thing with the tea ceremony in the spring and so forth when they would use the tea. And this jar was the storage vessel for it. And what's really interesting is there's some good photographs of the bottom. This is what the bottom of what these things should look like right there. Beautifully done. And here's the wrapper, one of the wrappers for it. There's some papers. And here's the cloth, the Ming Dynasty textiles that were used when they sealed it with the tea inside. These were still with it, which makes it absolutely fascinating. The family used this jar for hundreds of years. The area they were from in Japan was particularly well known for the tea ceremony. And they had fashioned for the jar these silks and textiles and things to seal the jar up, to let the tea ripen or age inside the jar over the winter in the dark. And here's some of the fabric, which themselves are highly collectible. But when you package them with the piece itself, it really makes a difference. And there's a very, very good write-up in here. Rosemary Scott wrote this one, and it's worth reading. All right. And these are sort of interesting. I threw these in here just because this is a really interesting thing. A pair of clobbered lime green ground iron red decorated Meiping vases. It's a pair. They're beautifully done. And but the later enamels, these were redecorated. Maybe in Europe, I don't know. But very unusual. Really unusual that somebody would do that. You see export wares are clobbered all the time, very common. But here you have these, and Qianlong mark and period, a pair of them. And let's see, what did they bring? They were estimated at $200,000 to $300,000, and they ended up selling for 1.7 million Hong Kong. There was a lot of interest in these because you don't see clobber wares very often. They didn't call them clobber wares. They just said the enamels are later. With not much information on them. That's all they said, which is I wish they had gone into some detail on that. Or maybe they didn't know. Maybe they don't know, much to say other than have later enameling on them. But beautifully done, sold for about $2 million. Or no, what does that work out to? Not $2 million. Sold for about 1.72. $250,000. Again, sorry about that. I mix up the conversions. And then on to this. This was one of the great rarities in the sale, and the Sanduao hexagonal vases. And this one was Qianlong period, but very early Qianlong period, because it's nearly identical to one that's known that has a Yongchen mark on it. And again, this was been under the oversight of Tan Ying, and they think this was made just at the very beginning of the Qianlong era, because they have another example that's virtually identical in its shading, in its tone, and execution, and the fantastically fine details on this in cobalt. There, pull this in. Really great quality, really fine quality, and they make these. There's only, I think there's a couple of handfuls of these in the world too, maybe 10 of them that are authentic, And these turn up in auctions all the time, the fakes, not the originals. And they turn up, again, with our friends down in Georgia, Empire Auctions and all this. And I had somebody send me a picture of one just last week that was in a sale that was coming up, and I had to just say, no, no, no. And one of the areas where they miss when they decorate these is that the inside of the peaches, for example, in the interior areas, you see how light this gets. And on the reproductions, they tend to make them too dark. They're too opaque, and the heaping and piling looks like it was just sort of dabbled onto it. They look too much like little rows of too stylized. The dots, just the dotting, this business here just doesn't look right on them. But this one is spectacular, and it's done. The flowers and so forth are sort of done in the Ming style, which was very popular in the Qianlong period. These Ming style decorations, and just an elegant, huge vase, beautifully done all the way around. Very, very rare. Sold for 11 million Hong Kong, or about 1.3 million dollars US, but extremely rare, and in pristine condition. And I think that it's funny. I would think these would be worth more, but it was estimated at 7 to 9 million. And so far, the ones that we're looking at, they did okay. We're just going through the ones that did well. If you want to see the ones that flopped, go over and look at the results on Christie's. It's too bad. And then we're getting back to this, the copper red vase that we talked about at the beginning, that was virtually identical to the one that sold at Sotheby's a few weeks ago, and ended up this time around selling for about 400,000 Hong Kong dollars less than the other. Now, there may be some reasons. Maybe when you examine them in person, you'll see things that differentiate them, and that may be the reason for the lower price. But it also may be the economy. It may be the economy. The economy during the Sotheby's sales that hadn't quite taken the big hit the global economy that it took a few weeks later during the Christie's event. And world events do affect the markets. Okay. So that was sort of the sale. I tried to find the sort of the highlight reel pieces, the pieces that are most interesting. And there were lots of pieces that were good. But as I said at the beginning, I just think everybody got too excited with the estimates. They overestimated things, and the audience rejected it. The audience rejected it, and that can happen if you sell things at auction. What you think it's worth doesn't matter. What the market thinks is worth really is the only thing that matters, and you have to be willing to deal with that, or take it to a dealer and have them sell it for you, and do it that way with a fixed price. But you generally wait longer. You may get stronger money in the end. Auction prices always aren't the highest prices you get. A lot of galleries sell things for considerably more than the auction market. But it's a time thing. If you're going to do that, you're going to have to wait a while. All right. So anyway, that sort of covers it. It was interesting. It'll be interesting to see what goes on this summer. There's a lot of talk. I was just reading the Wall Street Journal today that there's some concern about a pretty strong recession coming into 2023. We'll see. We'll see how that affects the market. It will affect it. It will absolutely affect it. It'll affect all of the art markets. Some people will hold cash, get out of the stock markets, get out of some real estate maybe. Other people will want to put some of their money into objects, and how much they do, time will tell. But for right now, it's sort of a period of flux. We don't know what's going to happen, but all of it is interconnected, and let's always keep that in mind. Alrighty. Thanks for watching. If you hadn't subscribed yet, please do. And we'll be back tomorrow with the regular weekly video. And there's a couple of videos I'm working on also, sort of to do with Chinese art and culture that I think will be sort of interesting. It's just a matter of getting the information together. Okay. Thanks for watching, and have a great rest of your week. Bye-bye.